Jason had always been curious. As a 10-year-old, he possessed a boundless imagination and an insatiable desire to explore. So when his best friend, Tom, invited him to stay over for the weekend, he was thrilled. Tom's house was old and full of nooks and crannies, the perfect setting for their adventures. The two boys had been friends since kindergarten, and Jason always enjoyed his time at Tom's house. It was a large, creaky Victorian-style mansion with an attic and a basement, both of which they'd explored countless times. However, there was one place they'd never ventured into: the Forbidden Room. Tom's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Halloway, were always very kind, but strict about one particular rule. Under no circumstances were the boys allowed to enter the room at the end of the second-floor hallway. The door was always locked, and a large ornate sign hung on it, reading, "Forbidden Room. Do not enter." The mystery surrounding the room only fueled Jason's curiosity. He'd asked Tom about it many times, but Tom didn't know much more than he did. All they knew was that the room was off limits, and that was that. But this weekend, Jason felt a sense of adventure brewing. He was determined to find out what was behind that door. Jason arrived at Tom's house on Friday evening, greeted warmly by Mr. and Mrs. Halloway. Mrs. Halloway, with her kind smile and soft voice, made Jason feel instantly at home. She ushered him into the kitchen, where the smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air. "Help yourself, Jason," she said, pointing to a plate of chocolate chip cookies. "Dinner will be ready in an hour." "Thanks, Mrs. Halloway," Jason replied, grabbing a cookie and heading upstairs with Tom. The two boys spent the next few hours playing video games in Tom's room. As the night wore on, their conversation inevitably drifted towards the Forbidden Room. "Do you think we'll ever find out what's in there?" Jason asked, his voice low and conspiratorial. Tom shrugged. "I don't know. My parents are really strict about it. But sometimes, late at night, I hear strange noises coming from that room." Jason's eyes widened. "What kind of noises?" Tom hesitated. "It's hard to describe. Sometimes it sounds like whispering, other times like scratching." Jason felt a shiver run down his spine, but tried to appear brave. "Maybe we could sneak in tonight and take a look." Tom's eyes widened in alarm. "Are you crazy? If my parents find out, we're going to be in so much trouble." "But they won't find out," Jason insisted. "We'll be quiet. Just a quick peek, and then we'll leave." Tom seemed to consider this for a moment, before finally nodding. "Okay, but we have to be really careful." After dinner, the boys pretended to go to bed. They waited until the house was silent, listening to the sounds of Mr. and Mrs. Halloway going to bed, and the creaks and groans of the old house settling for the night. When they were sure everyone was asleep, they quietly slipped out of Tom's room and crept down the hallway. The door to the Forbidden Room loomed ahead of them, the ornate sign glowing faintly in the dim light. Jason felt his heart pounding in his chest as they approached. He reached out and gently tried the handle, but, as expected, it was locked. "Now what?" Tom whispered. Jason pulled a small paperclip from his pocket. "I've been practicing," he said with a grin. Tom watched nervously as Jason bent the paperclip into a makeshift lockpick and began to work on the door. After a few tense minutes, there was a soft click and the door swung open. The boys exchanged excited glances and slipped inside, closing the door quietly behind them. The room was dark, and Jason fumbled for a light switch. His fingers found a cord hanging from the ceiling, and he pulled it, illuminating the room with a dim, flickering bulb. What they saw took their breath away. The room was filled with strange, old-fashioned medical equipment. Jars filled with preserved specimens, surgical tools laid out on a table, and shelves lined with dusty books. But the most disturbing thing was the large metal table in the centre of the room, complete with restraints. "What is this place?" Tom whispered, his voice trembling. Jason shook his head, too shocked to speak. He walked over to a shelf and picked up one of the books. The cover was embossed with strange symbols, and the pages were filled with diagrams of human anatomy and notes written in a language he didn't understand. Suddenly, they heard a noise coming from the corner of the room. It was a low, deep moan, like something straight out of a nightmare. The boys turned slowly, their eyes widening in horror. In the corner of the room was a large cage, and inside it was a figure hunched over in the darkness. As their eyes adjusted, they could make out more details. The figure was human, or at least it had been once. Its skin was pale and covered in scars. Its limbs twisted in an unnatural way. It looked up at them with eyes sunk deep into its skull and let out another moan. The boys were frozen in fear, unable to move or speak. The figure reached out a gnarled hand towards them, its fingers claw-like and thin. "We have to get out of here," Tom whispered urgently, grabbing Jason's arm. Jason nodded, tearing his eyes away from the horrifying sight. They backed towards the door, their hearts racing. Just as they were about to reach the door, it swung open, and they found themselves face to face with Mr. Halloway. Mr. Halloway's expression was unreadable, his eyes cold and hard. "What are you doing in here?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. The boys were too terrified to respond. Mr. Halloway grabbed them by the arms and dragged them out of the room, slamming the door shut behind them. He marched them down the hallway and into the living room, where Mrs. Halloway was waiting, her face pale and anxious. "Sit down," Mr. Halloway ordered, pushing the boys onto the couch. He and Mrs. Halloway exchanged a long, tense look before turning back to the boys. "You were told never to go into that room," Mrs. Halloway said, her voice trembling. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "We're sorry," Jason stammered. "We were just curious." Mr. Halloway sighed heavily. "I suppose we owe you an explanation," he said, his tone softening slightly. "But you must promise never to speak of this to anyone. Do you understand?" The boys nodded eagerly, desperate to know the truth. Mr. Halloway sat down in an armchair, rubbing his temples as if trying to find the right words. "Many years ago, before Tom was born, I was a doctor," he began. "I specialised in experimental medicine and surgery. My work was controversial, to say the least. I believed that I could find a way to cure even the most severe injuries and diseases by pushing the boundaries of medical science." He paused, his eyes distant and haunted. "One day, a man came to me with a proposal. He claimed to have discovered a way to achieve immortality, to heal any wound, cure any illness, and even bring the dead back to life. He needed my expertise to perfect his technique. I was intrigued, so I agreed to help him." Mrs. Halloway's eyes filled with tears as she took over the story. "At first, everything seemed to be going well. The experiment showed promise. and we were hopeful that we were on the verge of a breakthrough. But then, something went wrong. The treatments began to have side effects. The man we were working with became increasingly unstable, Mr. Halloway continued. His body started to change in ways we couldn't explain. He became violent, dangerous. We tried to reverse the process, but it was too late. He'd become something inhuman. "That's him in the cage," Tom whispered, his eyes wide with horror. Mr. Halloway nodded grimly. "Yes, we've kept him locked away ever since, trying to find a way to help him, to cure him. But so far, we've had no success." The boys were silent, processing the incredible story they just heard. Finally, Jason spoke up. "Why didn't you just put him out of his misery?" Mrs. Halloway shook her head. "We can't. His body regenerates too quickly. Any injury we inflict on him heals almost instantly. He's trapped in that state, unable to live or die." The room was filled with a heavy silence as the gravity of the situation sank in. The boys exchanged a glance, their curiosity replaced by a deep sense of dread. They now understood why the forbidden room was off limits, and why the Halloways had been so strict about it. "We're sorry," Tom said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "We didn't mean to cause any trouble." Mr. Halloway sighed and nodded. "I know, but now you see why it's so important to follow the rules. We must keep this secret, all of us, for everyone's safety." The boys nodded, promising to never speak of what they'd seen. The rest of the weekend passed in a tense, uneasy silence. Jason and Tom kept their distance from the forbidden room, their curiosity now replaced by fear and respect for the horror it contained. On Sunday afternoon, Jason's parents came to pick him up. Mr. and Mrs. Halloway thanked them for allowing Jason to stay and reminded him once more to keep their secret. Jason nodded, still shaken by what he'd learned. As they drove away, Jason looked back at the house. The image of the forbidden room and its horrifying occupant burned into his mind. He knew he would never forget what he'd seen, and he vowed to never let his curiosity get the better of him again. Years passed, and Jason and Tom grew up. They remained close friends, but they never spoke of the forbidden room again. The memory of that weekend stayed with them, a dark secret they carried in the back of their minds. One day, when they were both in their 20s, Tom called Jason out of the blue. His voice was urgent and filled with fear. "Jason, you need to come over. It's about the forbidden room." Jason's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't thought about that room in years, but the mere mention of it brought back a flood of memories. He agreed to meet Tom at his parents' house, feeling a sense of dread and curiosity gnawing at him. When he arrived, Tom greeted him at the door, his face pale and drawn. "It's my parents," he said, his voice shaking. They disappeared." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean they disappeared?" Tom led him inside, explaining as they walked. "They went into the forbidden room 2 nights ago, and they never came out. I waited, but there was no sign of them. I peeked in, and the cage is open." Jason's mind raced, struggling to process what Tom was saying. "The man in the cage? He's gone too?" Tom nodded, his eyes wide with fear. "Yes, I don't know what happened, but they're all gone. And I don't know what to do." Jason took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "We need to find them, Tom. We need to figure out what happened and make sure they're safe." They made their way to the forbidden room, the door still slightly ajar. Inside, the room was exactly as Jason remembered, filled with old medical equipment and strange artifacts. But the cage in the corner was open, its bars twisted and broken. As they searched the room, they found a notebook on the table, filled with Mr. Halloway's notes. The last entry was dated 2 days ago, just before he and Mrs. Halloway disappeared. It detailed their latest attempts to cure the man in the cage, and the strange behaviour he'd exhibited in recent weeks. "He was getting stronger," Tom said, reading over Jason's shoulder. They thought they were making progress, but it looks like he was just biding his time, waiting for an opportunity to escape. Jason nodded grimly. "We need to find them, Tom, and we need to be careful. If that man's out there, who knows what he's capable of?" The search for Mr. and Mrs. Halloway led Jason and Tom to the old basement, a place they'd seldom ventured in their childhood. It was dark and damp, filled with shadows that seemed to move and shift in the dim light of their flashlights. They moved cautiously, their footsteps echoing in the silence. As they explored the basement, they found more of Mr. Halloway's notes, scattered and torn, as if there'd been a struggle. The notes detailed their experiments and the increasingly erratic behaviour of their subject. Suddenly, they heard a noise from the far corner of the basement. A horrifying growl that terrified them to their very core. They turned, their flashlights illuminating the source of the sound. There, standing in the shadows, was the man from the cage. He was no longer the hunched, twisted figure they'd seen years ago. He stood tall and menacing, his body still covered in scars, but now rippling with unnatural strength. His eyes glowed with a malevolent intelligence, and he let out another growl as he stepped towards them. Jason and Tom backed away, their hearts pounding in their chests. "We need to get out of here," Jason whispered urgently. But the man moved with lightning speed, blocking their path. He looked at them with a twisted smile, his voice a low, mocking hiss. "You shouldn't have come here. The Halloways thought they could control me, but they were wrong. And now, you will pay for their mistakes." Jason and Tom exchanged a terrified glance, realizing they were trapped. But before the man could make a move, a figure emerged from the shadows behind him. Mr. Halloway, holding a syringe filled with a glowing green liquid. "Get away from them!" Mr. Halloway shouted, plunging the syringe into the man's neck. The man let out a roar of pain and fury, his body convulsing as the liquid coursed through his veins. He turned on Mr. Halloway, but the scientist stood his ground, his face set with determination. "Run, boys," Mr. Halloway yelled. "Get out of here now!" Jason and Tom didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted for the stairs, their hearts racing as they heard the sounds of the struggle behind them. They reached the top of the stairs and slammed the door shut, leaning back against it with all of their weight. Breathless and shaken, Jason and Tom stood in the hallway, trying to process what had just happened. They could still hear the sounds of the struggle from the basement, but gradually the noise subsided, replaced by an eerie silence. Finally, the basement door creaked open, and Mr. Halloway emerged, looking exhausted but unharmed. Mrs. Halloway was with him, her face white as snow, but filled with relief at the sight of the boys. "It's over," Mr. Halloway said, his voice trembling. "He's gone. The serum. It worked. It neutralized him." Jason and Tom rushed forward, embracing Mr. and Mrs. Halloway. "We were so worried," Tom said, his voice choked with emotion. "We thought we'd lost you." Mrs. Halloway hugged her son tightly. "We're all right, Tom, thanks to your father." Tom had a quizzical look on his face. "But how did he not hurt you?" Mr. Halloway nodded, his expression weary. "We've been trying to find a way to stop him for years. I finally developed a serum that could neutralize the regenerative properties and put an end to his torment. It was a risk, but it was the only way. As I suspected this day would come, I'd secretly built a panic room below the basement. We managed to get there just as he escaped, but couldn't get out. That is, until you came along." Jason looked at Mr. Halloway with admiration and respect. "You saved us. Thank you." Mr. Halloway shook his head. "I'm sorry you boys had to go through this, but now you understand why that room was off limits. Some secrets are too dangerous to be revealed." The boys nodded, their curiosity finally satisfied. They'd uncovered the truth behind the forbidden room, but it had come at a great cost. They knew they would never forget the horrors they'd witnessed, but they also knew that they'd gained a deeper understanding of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. As they left the Halloway house that day, they felt a sense of closure. The forbidden room was no longer a mystery, but a cautionary tale about the dangers of pushing the boundaries of science and the importance of respecting the unknown. But as they walked away, they wondered what else Mr. Halloway had hidden away elsewhere as part of his ghastly work. But some things are best left alone.